This is better than a booster, where I recommend EDH cards you can buy for less than a booster pack. Thunder Junction play boosters are just under $6, so all 10 cards this month are cheaper than that, but most of them are less than $1. I want to start with the mythics I teased in the thumbnail, but first, if you like my videos, consider subscribing and checking out the Patreon. Thanks. Hunting Grounds is a really awesome card, which is only 50 cents. Green-white for an enchantment with Threshold. As long as 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, Hunting Grounds has, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. So for a measly 2 mana, you can put any creature into play. Alright, you do need Threshold, but that's not super difficult to do. If you're in a graveyard deck with commanders like Carador or Thalia in the Gitrog, then Threshold should basically be free. But even in any green-white deck, you can play a fetch land or Evolving Wilds. That's 1 thing in the bin. Cast a ramp spell, that's 2. Cast some card draw, that's 3. Play some removal, that's 4. A few creatures die, and some other spell, and then you're basically done. Threshold will easily happen over the course of a game. Then, Hunting Grounds only needs you to put 1 creature into play to make your mana back. And I love that it just puts the creature into play. So, yeah, you don't get cast triggers, but it does make the creature you put into play uncounterable. So if you sneak in the Hunting Grounds early, people might not be able to counter it, and then if they're playing a blue heavy deck, this card can be really difficult to beat. And you might say, well, don't you need creatures in hand? This is true, but creatures generate so much card advantage, it's pretty easy to keep creatures in hand. Using Hunting Grounds to put Fierce Empath in play and then tutor up another threat, which then you get to put into play, is really powerful. Or creatures like Regal Force, Prime Speaker Zagana, which just draw you cards when they come into play. Every time I see Hunting Grounds, it puts in so much work and is an absolute kill on-site threat. Territory Forge is the cheapest new card from the big score, and I think that means people are sleeping on it. So 4 in a red for an artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target artifact or land. And then it has all the activated abilities of the exiled card. So you can exile a Field of the Dead, and it'll tap for 1 mana, because you only get the activated abilities, not the triggered abilities. Which is fine, it's useful, but I think people are not realizing how in practice this card is going to be really strong. Let's say somebody casts the One Ring. If you hit that with a Territory Forge, you get to copy the activated abilities, which is putting counters on the card and drawing cards. But the triggered ability for damage doesn't get copied, so you'll get a 1 ring with no downside. Let's say your opponent is going for Cabal Coffers Urborg. Well, the Forge lets you yoink the coffers, and since Urborg affects all of your lands are swamps. And then you have a fully powered Cabal Coffers. There's so many other random artifacts and lands that you're going to run into that have activated abilities, which will be strong once you steal them. Imagine stealing a Memnarch and just getting the activated abilities of that on something that doesn't die to a board wipe. And at worst, you're just going to exile someone's Mazavith and have a Mazavith, which is fine. It's not that bad. I like this card a ton, and I'm going to be testing it in my Taurnos deck to double up that trigger. Sticking with new cards, Lavaspur Boots is really great. 1 colorless for an equipment, equip for 1, and equip creature gets +1/+0, and haste and ward 1. A lot of people are trying to compare this to Swiftfoot Boots or Lightning Greaves, but I think this is a pretty poor comparison. If you're playing these boots for the protection, then yeah, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots are better. But if you're more interested in having a haste enabler or cheap equipment, then Lavaspur Boots is just as good. At 1 mana, you can grab these boots from an Urza Saga or me. Then they sit on the field and can provide haste for 1 mana. That's really the power of Lavaspur Boots. If you play a lot of big creatures that you want to have swing in, or creatures with activated abilities, you should try out Lavaspur Boots as a haste enabler. Going back to the last set, Reenact the Crime has fallen in price, probably because the cheese combo deck didn't make it into Modern, but I do think the card is still good in EDH. Blue, blue, blue 1 for an instant. Exile target non-land card in a graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. Copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So because it says from the graveyard from anywhere, There are a lot of great ways you can use this. If you mill someone, you can then cast the best thing you milled. If you counter a spell or use removal on something, then you can cast the thing that you just removed. If you play Entomb, you can put something in your graveyard and then cast that, which means this could be like a 5-mana instant speed Omniscience. And since you cast the card, an Eldrazi will give you the cast triggers. This is a really fun card to just hold up and cast if somebody used a board wipe and then you can just yoink the best creature. It doesn't go in every deck, especially with that triple blue cost, but I do think there are a lot of decks which could make use of it, especially self-mill or mill decks. Bösium Strip is a personal favorite card of mine. A 3-mana artifact where you can pay 3 and tap it. Until end of turn, you may cast instant and sorcery spells from the top of your graveyard. If a spell cast this way would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. This $2 reserveless bomb is like a colorless Past in Flames, but it lasts the whole turn. I guess it's more like a budget Yogg's Will, basically allowing you to double up on every spell you cast. You can ritual and then ritual again. You can double cantrip, then double tutor. It lets you do some pretty wild and wacky things. Plus, if you just run a lot of instants and sorceries in your deck, late game, the strip will let you basically draw a ton of cards. I also realize many players might not know this, but in formats like Commander Legacy or Vintage, you actually can't change the order of your graveyard because of cards like Bösium Strip and a few others that exist. It's only in formats where these cards don't exist at all where you're allowed to change the order of your graveyard. In Commander, you can use Fossil Find to reorder your graveyard and set up your Bösium Strip. This card isn't super powerful, I don't want to mislead anyone. It is a little clunky and mana intensive, but it is a pretty good budget alternative to Yawgmoth's Will if you're looking for that type of card. Try it out in your Spellslinger decks. Plus, it's reserveless, so getting it now when it's $2 is probably better than getting it later. You know when you play an Extort card, and over time you just gain a ton of life, because in the late game, you just tack 1 extra mana onto everything you play and gain 3 life. That's how I feel about Sylvok Lifestaff. 1 mana for an equipment, for equipped 1, equipped creature gets +1/+0, but also, whenever equipped creature is put into a graveyard, gain 3 life. Basically, in an Aristocrats deck, you can pay the 1 mana, equip before you sacrifice a creature, and then gain 3 life. It's sort of like Extort in that way. You can easily gain 12 or more life in 1 turn in an Aristocrats deck. It does really only go into an Aristocrats deck, maybe SRAM if you just want cheap equipment, but man is this an efficient way to gain life if you have sacrifice fodder. Give it a try if you're looking for more life gain in any deck that has things you sacrifice. Also, a 1 mana artifact, I know I said it before, but super good with Urza Saga, Trinket Mage, lots of ways to tutor it. Glory is an interesting card I've been testing with lately. 3 white for a 3/3 incarnation with flying. And then it has an activated ability for 2 and a white, choose a color, creatures you control gain protection from the chosen color until end of turn. Activate only if Glory is in your graveyard. So on board, this does nothing, it's a 3/3 flyer. But in your graveyard, it's a repeatable Brave the Elements. And Brave the Elements is already a decent card. Honestly, it could be on this list. Protection from a color will often allow you to just swing all out at a player. And if you really need to get through multiple monocolored blockers, fine, you can just activate Glory multiple times. It's also amazing on defense. If you hold up 3 mana and a blocker, it's really hard for them to attack into you, since you can just pay the mana, give it protection, and block for free. This also lets you blank removal by responding to a Swords to Plowshares, by giving your whole team protection from white. And Glory itself works from the graveyard, so it's not like a Wrath is going to sweep away this effect. It stays there unless they can exile it. Super good card, and weird fun fact, but the Judge promo is the only Magic card in existence printed in Hebrew. Herald of Anguish is a card that only shows up in 1% of Tifit decks, and 0.65% of Prosper decks, and that is way too low. 5 black for a 5/5 flying demon with Improvise, and at the beginning of your end step, each opponent discards a card, and pay black and 1, sacrifice an artifact, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. So if you're in a deck with random clues, treasures, and artifact tokens lying around, this card immediately becomes way better because of Improvise, basically letting you tap those for mana or getting double use out of treasures. and it causes each opponent to discard on the end step, so you immediately get the value. And the cherry on top of turning random artifacts into removal pushes this card into the really high value territory, yet it's still dirt cheap. For a creature that seems to do almost everything, I'm shocked I don't see it in more artifact decks, discard decks, or decks that just want to be sacrificing random artifacts. Recently, I've been brewing around channel cards, and Shinen of Life's Roar is one of the most interesting channel cards I've tested. Green and 1 for a 1/2 spirit, with all creatures able to block it, do so. Channel 2 green, all creatures able to block target creature, do so. So the creature half is kinda fun, because it forces everything to block it, so the rest of your team becomes unblockable. And if you can give it death touch or buff it up in any way, that's phenomenal. But the channel ability is also really neat. Let's say one opponent has an annoying creature affecting the whole table. Draenith Magistrate, let's say. You can tell a different opponent, hey, attack with your creature big enough to kill the annoying utility creature, and I'll remove it. You then force all creatures to block, and as long as their creature had enough power to kill the Magistrate, doesn't matter how many creatures block it, your opponent can assign damage as they wish and kill the Draenith. You can basically politics this into removal, or just surprise someone. Maybe one opponent will attack with a creature, and boom, now the defending player has to block with their commander. Plus, the channel ability is not a spell, so it's basically uncounterable. I think this card's really neat. It also goes really well in the new Ansrag, so if you built that and you missed this random common card, you should pick one up. Rohirrim Chargers is one of those Tales of Middle-earth cards that I totally missed, and it'll probably go up in price later. 2 white-red for a 4/4 human knight. You may exert it when it attacks. Whenever you exert a creature, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an equipment card. Put that onto the battlefield attached to that creature, then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this card is just great in any equipment deck. You don't really need other exert synergy for this to be good. Let's say you have a haste enabler, like Lavaspur Boots maybe, then this can easily cheat out a ton of mana. If you think about it, a 4-drop that casts and equips an equipment, on average, will have made its mana back with 1 trigger. And for some equipment, this might feel like cheating on a lot of mana. Also, Exert only stops it from untapping on your next untap step. If you're able to give it Vigilance, then it never taps anyway, and you can attack every turn. Equipment decks are pretty popular, and I don't think we're going to be seeing the in-universe version of a lot of these Lord of the Rings cards for a long time. So if you're thinking about building an equipment deck, maybe pick this up while it's still cheap. So those are my top budget picks for this month. What did you think? Are you going to try any of these out? Let me know in the comments below. Also, give me your suggestions for other budget picks in the comments as well. Thank you so very much for watching, and special thanks to my tier 3 patrons, whose names you see here. If you want to be in the credits or see the other perks, go check out my Patreon. Link is in the description.